didn't seem to fit, even though they were all right. So I feel like it's hard to put my finger on exactly what it is. There's kind of three informal sections through the progression of the collection of stories. It begins with fable and fairy tale and parable, and then it gets into more specifics, dates and times, but it retains a sense of that fantastic. The middle section is a lot about art and reality, and then there you go.
Just sort of interested in that sort of connection of art and also the writing. The fact that you are also a playwright and also an artist, as well as being wonderful with words. How do you see that process? Looking particularly at the book that we've got, the collection of stories there, do you see that somehow evolves from your interest in other branches of arts as well? The drawing, for example, sort of interested in the way that some of the stories are created. Do you have a sort of a visual sense of what it is that you want to say, and that with the prints that you've got, or do you find that the words come?
Well, the words definitely happen to get first, and then are illustrated. I don't think they directly illustrate the stories. Hopefully they add something a bit extra to it.
Which just interested in that process, looking at the words, is there an overall approach, if you like, that works in words and also in images? Or do you find that you come with the words and then the images result from that, and separately almost too, or is it sort of a combined aspect? Because I noticed in the book itself that you've got a lot of the images there. So do you see as sort of
a lot of the images there in the words?
Sorry, that you've got the prints, you've actually got the prints illustrated in the book.
Yeah.
So do you find that there's that sort of connection between the words and the images in that book?
In what? Yeah, I think.
Well, I suppose I'm just interested. It's a wonderful talent to have the sense of the visual, and also to create images, listening to what you were reading out before.
Yeah.
But it's very the language that you use does create for the reader and for the listener a really strong sense of the visual.
Yeah, and I didn't want to compete with myself. I did originally think I'd ask someone to illustrate it, because I thought it would be great to have it illustrated. And I thought if someone else illustrated it, it would be complementary rather than just an illustration. But then I had such a definite idea what I wanted to appear alongside the work that I did it myself. Yeah.
And did you feel that there were some things that were conveyed in the images that, while being complementary to the word, took you somewhere else? Or?
I don't think, if you can maybe press play, there's some, we'll flick through them there. Yeah, they'll just keep going like, yeah. So, but yeah, they're the images anyway.
I'll just flick through them.
Just interested in the way that shadow is used there, sort of, I suppose getting back to our theme of the dark and noir.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there is some, and certainly as you were reading that, there's that sense of some of the noir elements that we've talked about before. Do you think that there's an influence of noir in your work?
Definitely visually, especially in that middle section, where there's a specific time, but it's still mostly centered around a protagonist and a few main set of characters. That later on the narratives get blown out a little bit. But yeah, in that middle section, Sergei Sainovic's Imperial Moscow Theatre, and also the Bull-Headed Ranger, which is another story in there. They're definitely the visuals in there, but not necessarily what I've drawn, but also what I've drawn, but what I've imagined within the narrative, the series of images, definitely long shadows, lots of contrast, but also in terms of the plot, I think, like what you were describing before about ambiguous morality. There's a lot of ambiguity throughout most of them, but particularly that middle section. Yeah.
With the actually just thinking of the stories themselves, do you want to take us through some of the stimulus for some of the stories, or the process of writing? Because it's a very, although there's that sense of a unity pieces, and there's great variety there as well. Can you take us through some of perhaps the process of writing, of what interests you as a writer, and how that perhaps gets shown and brought out in the stories?
Yeah, well, they were written over quite a long period of time, so 7 years before they went to a publisher, and then that was at the end of 2012. They got back to me, so there's been a while since then as well. It's been a long process. Some of the story, like the title story, Pedro Piscator, I was working on throughout the whole time, I suppose. But some of the other ones, came out quite quickly. Like the one that I read from just then, Sergei Sainovich, I thought that came out quickly, but then I realised that was just a fairly rough sketch for the final one. So that's sort of about the process. But what was the full question? It was more about how they...
The stimulus, because there's such a rich imagination in the stories. So I'm just thinking of the stimulus for the writing.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of theatre metaphor and puppets and different things. Hence the cover illustration. It's in these stories, it becomes metaphor. In this theatre is creating another reality alongside our own. I suppose that's drawing from what I've done in that time. In those 7 years, aside from writing these, is make theatre and work on. A lot of my employment has been with other theatre companies or working kids or community groups or something like that. So, see, that metaphor is that's where that metaphor's come from, or that theme, that thread.
Do you think there's a sort of a Gothic element in the writing as well, or in the way that you develop some of the stories? And if so, does that relate to Noir in some way?
I asked you the other day what's the difference between, aside from the costumes, just so I could wrap my mind around what the difference was. Obviously, people dress in 19th century outfits in Gothic style and in 1940s style outfits in film noir, I think there's definitely a Gothic element to it. It's that sort of bleak. In some ways, some of them are bleak, some of them are fairly fantastic and musical, but there's definitely a Gothic in terms of ambiguous sort of endings, ambiguous moral tales, tackling issues of mortality and sanity, I suppose, which which is like the question of reality and sanity is, I suppose, prominent in both the Gothic and Noir.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the sanity aspect and certainly the ambiguity seems to be a crossover. That we didn't get time to talk about the fact that many of the noirs deal with the whole notion of madness and trying to people who are losing their grip on reality. But with the ambiguity, do you feel that with the creation of the stories, that do you shy away from having a very clear and definite conclusion on it, or are you sort of interested in that sort of grey area that exists in reading?
Not consciously. I don't shy away from. It's not like a conscious decision to leave it ambiguous. But I suppose I consciously allow it to remain ambiguous. I don't really see the world in black and white ethical. Although I'm interested in ethical questions, but I don't see there being black and white ethical structure of existence.
Which again ties into that sort of notion of that we have a certain amount of claim of ambiguity. And even though noir is in black and white, in sort of often moral senses, it seems to explore that bit in between that where characters get caught.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I watched Double Indemnity the other night. There's a definite, it felt kind of immoral, but ultimately, in retrospect, it was quite moral because there was poetic justice inflicted on them, which I'm not sure if some of my stories have, like the bull-headed ranger just gets away with it. And that's, I mean, I was thinking about, with the bull-headed ranger, he's a bushranger that I invented, and I was kind of thinking of, being part of a colony that's part of an empire, and being the wealthiest city in the world at that time, and even the people who done nothing wrong are sort of beneficiaries of some fairly dark and insidious sort of things. And so I sort of wanted him to be a personification of that. Here's that's the image that's on the cover of the book.
Did you bring up some, you mentioned about props before?
Oh yeah.
And it might be a good opportunity to also perhaps just talk about the exhibition, the coming exhibition.
Yeah. In September, I don't have the dates on me, but there's some little flyers on. I think it's about the 4th on the 4th to the 28th of September. I've got an exhibition of mostly of limited edition prints. Of the illustrations from the book, but also a few of the originals, which I've got in my hand here. The reason there's not so many of the originals is the originals aren't the finished work. Most of the I've done with these images. I've done them in different layers. So that's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pictures in it. Some of them have got, like that's got quite a lot of different ones I've done separately. I've painted all the shadows individually in the background with brush and ink. So, but I thought I'd, do you want to hold one?
Sure.
One side and you can flick through it. So, I mean that one's the simplest one that sort of appears pretty much as it is. He was, this guy is a projection of myself when I'm older. He's up there too at the moment. And she's there, she just flicked past. I'll keep you on your toes. But yeah, she's just a detail in the bigger image. And here's the second, yeah, that one. Yeah. That's a detail from one of the more complex ones. But, and this is from that one as well. That's the final one. Cover image. Also the cover image. And turn your head to the side. And that's the background for the one with the marionette, except I've just used that one tree, I think, and repeated it over and over. That's another background.
And the exhibition,
It's at the lighthouse, no, the Light Factory gallery on Browan Street. So, do you know where it is? I suppose a lot of people here would probably know where that is. And if there's some flyers around. If there's not enough, if you want to put your name on the mailing list, it's a mailing list for my theatre company, but also for myself to find out about it. That's you're welcome to do that as well.
We might leave it there, and again, just a plug on Lachlan's book, and it's available here, and Lachlan's available to sign copies if you want to get them. I recommend it. It's fantastic read, some really, really good writing.
Thanks, Mike, and also thanks to Mira and for suggesting me to Rachel, and thanks to Rachel for running the event. So yeah, thanks, Pedro.
So we've got a bit of time for questions. If anyone would like to ask questions of Lachlan and myself.
Mike, you mentioned the importance of cities in film noir. What are the major or the key cities in film noir and novels or books?
There's often an unnamed city that's called, I think Paradise is one, which is meant to be ironic. It's referred to Paradise City, and there's one that's called Terminal City, which is also a good one too. But a film called Dial 1119. Mostly New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I suppose the Los Angeles, San Francisco, California based environment is strong for many of them. Of course, many of the films that were supposedly set in New York were actually filmed in San Francisco, Hollywood, Los Angeles. But it would be Chicago is sometimes touched upon. American cities, London, there's didn't talk about a whole branch of noir. British noir, which is quite distinctive in a way, it follows some of the formulas, if you like, of American noir. But the city, in a way, is part of a myth. It's almost a mythical city, even though, because noir was very much sort of based in realism, we have a sense of the use of real locations. So often noir directors moved away from the studios and tried to create as real an environment as possible. But certainly New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
You mentioned in your original thing that the people creating these films didn't have the idea in mind, and that it was sort of discovered in retrospect by the French. like, why did they all create things with similar traits in the first place if they weren't intentionally doing it? Like, what was there one successful film that they sort of all copied, or like, did they get together and say we want to create this? Well, you said they didn't do that, so.
It's an interesting question because I don't think it's a case that. I think the Second World War had something to do with it, and also the lingering effect of the Depression. And it's interesting that the novels come first. That the novels are there in the 30s, and the writers are depicting a world post-Depression or in the middle of Depression. And as they say in America and the US, that the Depression lasted effectively to the end of World War II. How it emerged in that way, I think it was interesting with the French that they had taken up the novels and they produced things called séries noires, which were basically translations of Chandler, Kane, and so there was a preparation, if you like, in terms of French culture, where they took to these works and regarded them as exciting and new. Then they saw that the films seemed to be connected to them as well. So I also think that while the directors and the actors probably didn't know much of what was going on, but the directors were aware of, some of them had come from Germany and they were influenced by German expressionism, so and they were escaping the Nazis in many cases. So a group of writers, also from Hungary, a group of writers, European directors, were involved in the industry, and I think that changed. It wasn't a purposeful thing, but I think that meant that they were interested in similar things. So while they didn't sit down and say we're going to create a genre called noir,